Segment 5,
Yes.
Man of War,
Yeah.
you. Victor,
Yeah.
for whom are you named?
I'm named for Victor Hanson. He was a son of a Swedish immigrant, and he was a orphan. His mother died in childbirth. His father left him, so my father raised my father's family, and they joined the Marine Corps together. My father, for a variety of long stories, transferred to B-29s, and he joined the 6th Marine Division. He was killed on Okinawa on the last day of Sugarloaf Hill campaign. 29th Marine Regiment, 6th Marine Division, had about 90% casualties.
You write in The Father of Us All that you grew up, quote, around veterans of both world wars who talked constantly about battle.
Yes.
Your dad,
yes,
who lost this
my
almost brother of his.
Yes, they talked about Victor Hanson, who was killed in Okinawa. He flew 40 missions.
Your dad?
Yes, over Tokyo in a B-29, had to land emergency 2 or 3 times in Iwo Jima. My grandfather, Frank Hanson, was gassed at the Battle of Belleau Wood. My first cousin, Holt, was killed at Normandy Beach, Holt Cathers. So I heard all of that. They didn't talk about it a lot, but they had a certain tragic view that pretty much when you went to war, you didn't have any good choices. And they expected the worst to take place. And it also was permeated with this agricultural. We grew up on a farm, so just as you lost a crop one day before you were supposed to pick because of an inopportune hailstorm, or you had all your raisins ready to dry and a storm came up from Mexico and ruined them, that was the same type of things that we were told happened in war. And the result was a pretty bleak Scandinavian view that life is, as I said earlier, nasty, brutish, and short.
And you grew up on a farm, but you had an academic, clearly you were a bright kid. And you got good state.
Debatable.
Well, all right. You ended up at Stanford as a very young man, and not everybody from the Central Valley did. But was it growing up with these men in the background of your life that interested you in military?
I think also I had to work very hard on a ranch, and it was very isolated. And I wanted to get away. I had wonderful parents because although they lived on a farm and they worked, and my grandparents worked, my mother had gone to Stanford Law School when nobody did as a female in the 1940s. My father had enlisted out of University Pacific, and they stressed education. So when I got 18, I thought, you know what, I got to get off a tractor and get as far away from this as possible. But then when I was 26, I had a PhD, and I went back and farmed. So I was the laughing stock of the whole neighborhood out there pruning with a PhD, and everybody thought that was hilarious.
I happen to know you still go back to the farm and do pruning yourself. From The Father of Us All, what bothers us about wars is not just their occasionally horrific lethality. It's that people like ourselves choose to wage them. Close quote. Explain what you mean by that, particularly now that we know that your dad was bombing Tokyo.
Yes. Well, I mean, I can remember being in high school and having an advanced placement class on Hiroshima. I didn't really know anything about my dad, and he came to address our class about bombing Tokyo, and I was horrified because I did some research, and the March 11th fire raids did much more damage in Hiroshima.
Right.
And so I tried to tell him, I said, gosh, you're a war criminal. And he laughed and said, no, we stopped the Imperial Japanese Army. They were killing 20,000 Koreans, Chinese, Filipinos a day, and there was no other way. We're not supermen. How would you stop them? I remember he said to me, exact words, Victor, how would you stop them? Tell them to stop? We had a B-29. It would get 16 hours. He said it was like flying at night from Fresno to Utah.
Where'd they take off?
Took off on Tinian. They flew 1,600 miles in a rickety plane that was experimental. He had 16 planes. 14 never made it through the war. 2 crews survived. They brought in 8 crews. All of them got either shot down or lost. And his attitude was, I'm not a god, I'm just a human. And we were better than the alternative. So what he taught me was that the United States never has any claims that it's perfect. It's just better than the alternative. And if you don't believe it's better than the alternative, there's no reason for it to continue, really. And that idea, that agricultural military idea that humans are not perfect and they make mistakes, but the idea of being enduring and adjudicating them and judging them and correcting them and having some tolerance for human frailty is very important, not only in war, but also in farming and human experience. This utopianism has been fatal to our side. It's a new barbarism where we insist on perfection or we're no good.
Barack Obama, speaking in Oslo,
Yes.
giving his speech accepting the Nobel Peace Prize, quote, "Sworn to protect and defend my nation, I cannot be guided by the examples of," and he mentions Gandhi and Martin Luther King, "alone. I face the world as it is. Make no mistake, evil does exist in the world," close quote. This brings us back to the question with which we started. Evaluate Barack Obama so far as Commander-in-Chief.
Yes,
he sounds as though he has the tragic understanding,
He does,
doesn't he?
but you have to make one qualification. What
Right.
Barack Obama says, unfortunately, is not a guide to what he does. I mean, he said that he was not take campaign funds. He did. Shut down Guantanamo within a year. Tried KSM and all that stuff. Tribunals bad. Predators.
Just words.
Yeah, just words. Just look what he's done. I think that what we are seeing as a commander-in-chief, unfortunately, is a reset of the reset diplomacy. He came in and said, whatever Bush did, I'm not going to do. And now, whatever I said I was going to do, he's reset everything. Hillary Clinton the other day said, oh, there was kind of a coup in Iran. We didn't know the Revolutionary Guard really run things. So that Iranian thing is sort of off the table. The Russian deal where we had sort of said to the Czechs and Poles, no missile defense because they're going to help us with that. That's off the table. The Chavez outreach. He's going to be a stabilizing figure if we can get Bush out of the picture and use our charm on him. That's out now. Chavez is more involved. The Chinese said that the relationship's in trouble and it's our fault because basically we thought we can keep borrowing $1 trillion from them and then hector them about human rights Tibet. Sort of like you going to your banker.
You're wrong. He's been a better commander-in-chief than people like you and me had any reason to expect or than we did expect. And here's why. Because now the American people, and in particular the Democratic Party, have had this experience of watching someone who clearly intended to do everything as differently from George W. Bush as he could, in effect ratifying one aspect of American military reality after another. We're now going to try KSM in a military tribunal, not up in New York. We're still at war in Afghanistan. He increased the number of troops. And so now the war on terror has become bipartisan in a way that it couldn't have been if a Republican had succeeded Bush. Isn't it? So am I not making a case?
You're absolutely right.
All this is true, right? This is good news, right?
It is in a way, but it's why Woodrow Wilson can do what he did in World War I, FDR can do what he did, and Truman can do what he did. LBJ and JFK can do what they do because the idea is that a Democrat is a man of peace. He's a utopian. He doesn't like war. He goes to it reluctantly. A Republican is a bloodthirsty warrior-type person who likes war. And so anytime we have a Democratic president, the left wing is willing to forgive him in a much greater degree than he is a Republican. You're right. Obama's been a great gift not only to the Republicans but to George Bush because single-handedly he showed the world, he said to the world, your anti-Americanism, your George Bush hatred, your writ that Bush shredded the Constitution, it had nothing to do with reality. It was just piggybacking on the American left's critique of a sitting Republican president for partisan purposes. You know why? Because, look, we're doing everything that he did in Iraq, everything in Afghanistan, tribunals, renditions, intercepts, Patriot Act, etc., predators. And you people, where are the marches in Europe right now about predators? They don't exist. Where is some Hollywood celebrity giving a speech at the Oscars about rendition? Where's the movie Rendition? Where's the movie Redacted? Valley of Eli? Where's all these Hollywood anti-Iraq movies? They don't exist.
Last couple of questions. Michael Labite, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, submitted a question for you on Facebook. By the way, we announced a couple days ago that we would be doing the show together. Dozens of questions that mostly young people want to put to you. We only have time for one here. So Michael Labite says, what's changed in American war-making doctrine that has somehow permitted us to go from the doctrine of overwhelming force, Sherman, MacArthur, to this notion of social work under General McChrystal? Now, I'm not sure that you're going to let the questioner get away with calling General McChrystal's approach social work, but that's the question.
Two things.
Yep.
One was the advent in the 1940s of nuclear weapons, which meant that the traditional Western way of war of using overwhelming force to the enemy submits was problematic if you were engaged in a nuclear exchange. That was number one. And number two is with a greater more educated, more affluent, and more interconnected world populations, you had a lot of people who believed in the ultimate promise of the Enlightenment, that war was a thing of our Neanderthal past, it was a mistake, an accident, and we could educate people to a certain degree, and that such a utopian idea is the problem with the American military is not just they can't lose soldiers. That's understandable.
You're not going to let the questioner get away with suggesting that McChrystal is just engaged in social work.
No, I don't
You
think
have a high regard for McChrystal.
Oh, I do.
Right.
General McChrystal has a pretty formidable reputation in Iraq. He's a man who knows war firsthand. He's trying to win hearts and minds in a very sophisticated manner. I'm just saying that it's very hard for us. You can't have a soldier in today's society in the West. Imagine if General McChrystal, as General Patton said, that lined up the whole American military and said, we're going to cut the guts out of those people, we're going to slime them, we're going to go through them like blank through a goose. The society is postmodern. It's not up to that absolutism. And so it makes it very hard to fight a war, because what's war? It's based on an absolute reality. You have to kill the enemy before he kills you, and you have to kill enough of the enemy so that he agrees to your political agenda. And that's Neanderthal. And yet we have a pre-modern problem with a postmodern approach to it. And it's very difficult. I have nothing but sympathy for General McChrystal. You have to be a PhD and a killer at the same time.
Final question from the father of us all. Military history has a moral purpose. If we know nothing of Shiloh, Belleau Wood, Tarawa, and Chosin, then these sacrifices no longer serve as reminders that thousands endured pain and hardship for our rights, and that the departed expected future generations links in this great chain of obligation to do the same for those not yet born. Victor, in this country today, are we reaching the end of that great chain of obligation?
I'm worried because there's a lot of reasons to study military history. We could go on and on, but one reason that's never mentioned is you have a moral obligation to acknowledge the ultimate sacrifice of thousands of Americans in their youth. When you go to Walmart today and we see all that plethora of goods and that instant credit, we have to understand that there's somebody we don't even know, don't even care about, who died in a place like Okinawa, who died at Shiloh, who died at Valley Forge for that opportunity. I was on the American Commission for Battle Monuments overseas, and just to walk through a place like Ham or Normandy or the Argonne and see all of those white crosses, nobody knows their names, nobody knows what 8th Air Force means anymore, nobody knows what 101st means, and yet those people gave their all for us, and yet we have turned American history into melodrama, like Americans were genocidal or Americans had slavery. Never that compared to the alternative, we were far better than worse, and that we were good, and a certain number of people sacrificed for us, and we have to appreciate them rather than damn their memory. I'm very worried about it. Military history and acknowledgement of the collective sacrifice of American young people in the past should be the ultimate topic in our high schools and schools. Every class, every school should have some acquaintance, some mention of places like Tarawa or places like Guadalcanal or places like Belleau Wood.
Victor Davis Hanson, author of The Father of Us All, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge and the Hoover Institution. Thanks for joining us.